welcome to our 2024 Classified Professional and Leadership Development webinar series. I'm Ding Jo Curry. I'm the Director of Leadership Institute for Tomorrow in the Higher Education Leadership Institute in Higher Education Leadership. And we are here at Cal State University Fullerton. But what we do is all about the community colleges. We have closed caption for you if you prefer to use it. Our Classified Professional Leadership and Career Advancement webinar series is sponsored by the California Community College Chancellor's Office and hosted by the Leadership Institute for Tomorrow, LIFT. We offer a variety of programs from webinars to institutes, workshops, and a publication called Lift Your Voice. If you're not receiving the notices for the webinars, or you are not receiving Lift Your Voice publication, please ask your college, or you can email us directly. We'll make sure that you get on our list, because those are usually distributed through the Chancellor's Office. So speaking of the Chancellor's Office, I want to give a big shout out to the Chancellor's Office and also the California Community College Classified Professionals, the Classified Council Senate, collaborating with me in these webinars. You know, while this webinar series is designed for classified professionals, the content should be useful to anyone and everyone. In addition, if you are a faculty, administrator, or a trustee attending these workshops, I hope it can help you to be more mindful of how you might support the growth and the development of your classified professionals on campus. You know, I have said this before, that classified professionals are the breeding ground for leadership. Our classified professionals are diverse in backgrounds and talents, and you can switch lanes to be faculty if you want, and actually do both if you want. And I know of classified professionals who are also working as a classified professional while teaching a part-time course on the side. So you can actually be both, or you can advance your career to become administrators should you choose. So if this is your first time joining us, I want to especially welcome you and give you a good congratulations for taking the time to do professional development. You know, why is it important for us to enhance our capacities and skills? It's because so that everyone in the organization thrives. Because if we want to accomplish our goals, it takes the effort of everyone in the organization. So here in California community college system, we are working on Vision 2030. So I think it's really important to know, what are we collectively working on? So if you're not from California, because I do know we have people from outside of California tuning in. If you're not from California, you may also want to ask, what is our system's goal? What is our institution's goal? You know, that's important to you, because we're all working toward the same direction. Well, the Vision 2030 is under Chancellor Sonia Christian's leadership that we are now working on 2030 goals. The strategic direction of 2030 goals are equitable baccalaureate attainment, equitable workforce economic development, and generative artificial intelligence. And next, we have three major goals for Vision 2030. The goal number one is equity in success. Number two is equity in access. And goal number three is equity in support. So you didn't catch the main point. Really trying to look at equity 360 is really key here. So first, knowing your organization's goals help you focus and tune into the direction of what is it that, you know, at the macro level I'm focusing on. But today, we're also going to think about how do you focus on yourself, right? Enhancing your own capacity. So by raising these capacities individually within yourself and collectively as an institution, we raise the confidence level and we also raise the commitment level, I believe, for everyone, that we can arrive at our own personal goals that contribute to the collective goals of the institution so much more easily. Our topic today is breaking free from the imposter syndrome, diagnosis, and empowerment. This is something that the majority of people experience, yet sometimes we experience the feeling, but not knowing exactly what that is about. It's nagging at you, but you don't know what it is. You're really going to like our panel today because they have so much to share with you. So before I start, though, I hope you have a pen and paper with you to take some notes. And I want you to also put a star by those notes that you take to signify that's something that you say to yourself. I just heard that. I'm taking those. I want to be more aware of that, or I could try something like that, or I want to explore that one further, more, learn more. Okay, because each of the panel just told me earlier today that by talking about preparing for this webinar, they actually have studied it, explored it, and learned more about themselves as well as the topic. So let me introduce our esteemed panel. First, President Virginia Guloff from Butte College. President Guloff started her career in the community college as a classified professional. I will tell you, I will let her tell you, let's instead more about that later. And second, we have Olga Pizvalov. She is the director of Refugee Career Pathways in Los Rios Community College District. She is also on the California Classified Professional Classified Senate Advisory Board. So she holds a system-wide leadership role for the classified professionals. Then our third panel member is Dr. Vincent Rodriguez, president of Coastline Community College. Dr. Rodriguez also started his career as a classified professional. In fact, his entire career pathway has been at Coastline. That is unusual. From Coastline, from a classified professional, all the way to the presidency. And so our final panel member is Dr. Regina Smith. She's a senior advisor of equity and social justice to the chancellor at Los Angeles Community College District. So welcome, panelists. We are going to get started. Let me ask Dr. Rodriguez and President Guloff is our first question for the two of you, because you have unique experiences from classified professional risen to the presidency. So what signs or experiences first made you aware of this imposter syndrome in your own career journey? And how do you know the difference between an imposter syndrome or that you just needed a little bit of professional growth, professional development?
Thank you, Dr. Curry. I'm going to go first here, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be part of this panel. So I first had the experience of imposter syndrome when I had my first job here in the California Community College system. I started at De Anza College in 1986 and worked there until 1993 as a classified professional. And I remember on the first day, people were talking about things like FTES and pass rates and matriculation. And I didn't know what that meant. And that first feeling I think of imposter syndrome is I can't let anybody know that I don't know what this means because people will think I shouldn't be here. And I quickly learned to maybe do a little alchemy with that and turn that feeling into action to try to find out what these words meant. And that helped me move from that feeling of, oh, I really shouldn't be here, into a sense of empowerment for looking for knowledge. But I think we feel this all along our career, like the panelists here, I've held a number of positions from classified professional to faculty to administrator. And all along you get challenged with new information. And please excuse sorry, I might freeze here on you. Please excuse my internet connection. So I think that's that first feeling that you get, that I got, that, wow, wait, maybe I shouldn't be in this position because I don't really know what everybody's talking about, but then turning that into action and finding out.
If I could add to that, Virginia and I have been talking very similar of that feeling of, wow, when are they going to realize I don't know as much as they think I know, or that I'm not as smart as they are. I remember being called into meetings, and all of a sudden I look around the room and everyone outranks me if you think about the hierarchy within the organization. But then I didn't have the confidence to realize they pulled you in here because what you do know, and sometimes it's scary looking around like they're going to figure it out. When are they going to know? So for me, that was something where I had to continue to grow. I did every single professional development activity that was available so that I could stay ahead of things. And when you talk about when did you need professional development, is every once in a while I'd catch myself, if you're talking skiing, getting over the tips, or whether it's surfing, getting over the board a little bit and realizing, oh, wait a minute, I started talking about stuff that I didn't know enough about. And that's when I did need that professional development to go back. But more times than not, it was just not having the confidence in myself that, yes, we do know this, you got it, and to be able to own that. And that's when I first noticed it. And I even remember saying to someone, I feel like I'm an imposter, and them commenting about it. I didn't even know it was a syndrome at that time, but I've learned a lot more about it then. And then lastly, for me, it was noticing that I was doing a lot more on my own because I didn't want someone to notice, oh, wait a minute, I don't know all this, rather than pulling someone else in to help me with that. So those are some of the signs for me early on.
This feeling of, oh, hope I don't get discovered.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me ask our other two panelists that have you experienced what they just talked about, this imposter syndrome, and what were the thought and behavior patterns that signal you of such?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here. So for me, when I kind of started experiencing that imposter syndrome was I graduated with my master's in counseling in 2014, and a year later, I took a position at American Road College as a classified professional, student personnel assistant in athletics, and absolutely loved the job, but I knew that I was overqualified for it and potentially could do more. And I stayed in that job for 6 years. So there has been ups and downs, and thinking about what about my colleagues who do have that counseling job or who do have a management position, and am I not good enough? And that has been for a while. At the same time, when I started participating in the California Community Colleges Classified Senate and our local Senate at ARC, all of that helped me kind of think about where do I fit in, and how can I be the best where I am today while I wait for whatever that next opportunity is at the right time?
Dr. Smith.
Yeah, I would say very similar to some of the things that Olga mentioned. For me, I realized that the inequities of my environment allowed me to experience sexism and racism and classism that fed into my imposter syndrome. And I believe it's really has a lot to do with the gender stereotypes, the gender role expectations that males have toward professional women. Sometimes how we are recruited into positions can feed into our imposter syndrome. And I think a lot for me, I mean, I was fortunate enough to be raised in an environment that validated me every day, that told me individually who I am, culturally who I am, what my legacy is as a daughter, as a cousin, as a family, and to my community, what the expectations would be, and socially. And so because of that, I was told I had to work twice as hard. I had to get twice as many degrees because you're probably only going to get half the recognition. So you got to work really hard. So in doing so, I got the AA, 2 BAs, 2 masters, and I have my doctoral degree. And what I found is when I achieved all of these things. And later on reading about it, imposter syndrome, they call it the perfectionism, trying to do everything just right. And when I achieved all these things, I experienced what do you call the tall poppy syndrome, where you work in an environment and you have all these achievements, but then when you go into the environment, you're invalidated for these experiences. And you feel uncomfortable because people are uncomfortable with your achievements. And an example I'll give is that I was in an environment and I would refer to myself as Dr. Regina Smith. Well, I earned it. I'm going to wear it. I feel comfortable being a doctor. And I was told, please don't call yourself doctor because that makes other people feel uncomfortable. I thought, other people are uncomfortable because I'm referring to myself as a doctor. Then I was told, please don't call other people doctors who have earned their doctoral degree because that makes the people in the meeting feel uncomfortable because they don't have a doctoral degree. So after you go through all that you go through to achieve, you're asked to not acknowledge your achievements, your recognition. And, by others, I've been told, someone told me, do not call me a doctor because I feel uncomfortable. So they're imposter syndrome. So do you mind if I don't call you? I do mind. I want to be called. I earned that. So a lot of times I think with tall poppy, people will chop you down to put you in your place because they think you've achieved too much. And so that can feed into the imposter syndrome. And so I think a lot of people of color feel with the imposter syndrome that there's so many different segments that we'll talk about in regards to the intersectionality of the imposter syndrome and how it relates to us in a variety of ways, that it makes us look at the imposter syndrome from a different perspective,
Okay.
more of a racialized imposter syndrome.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And I'm wondering, I'm turning to all of you, the 4 panelists now, that what other signs can you give our participants today? Like, hey, do I have this or don't I? And if you have this, you most likely are experiencing part of it, of an imposter syndrome. And then a lot of times is once you know what it is, you named it, then you can deal with that, right? We can learn, how do I combat that feeling in a positive way toward what it is, that feeling I have, and what behavior, because there's imposter syndrome behaviors that manifest in the way that you are. So are there other signs that you can give our participants today as their own self-diagnosis?
Yes, I'd like to focus on a few tangible things that we can sometimes see that others do that make me think, okay, maybe you're experiencing that imposter syndrome. And it's about owning the space in the room. And whether it's in the Zoom room or in person, when somebody walks in and you see that they're trying to take as little space as possible in the room, they're kind of, slouched, and they're trying to kind of not be in front of anybody behind. They're just trying to take as little space as possible. And then when they start talking, a lot of the time somebody will ask a question or ask, oh, what does everyone think? And they start with, I'm sorry, and then they say what they think. So apologizing for something that you have to contribute is kind of one sign of that imposter syndrome. Also, when we do say our opinion, and this is more obvious with female leaders who experience imposter syndrome, is we end our sentences with questions. So we say our opinion, then we say, right, or what do you think? So those are some of the tangible ways that I can think of.
Oh, that's an excellent example. I love the part that, helping people understand that when you make a statement, you actually is making a question. Sometimes the question mark is not even there. It's just the tone of voice going down, right? When you're making a statement, whether your tone ends up in a down tone or you end up in an upward tone, like a question. I love that. Thank you, Olga. Any other signs that you can help us do a little self-diagnosis?
I think a lot of times things are managed in a room, in a meeting. A lot of times, you can tell when someone is speaking up and they're saying how they feel about a particular subject. Sometimes women will silence themselves because they feel like they're not the expert, or someone else might be the expert. Owning your voice and owning your experience, and just being careful when you're in a room to make sure that other people are not interrupting, and giving that respect and space to each other in the room. Because a lot of times when someone is saying something, sometimes people will often feel the need to paraphrase what that individual has said, as if they're the expert on what they were saying, as if that person is not competent enough to speak for themselves. And so you see that interaction a lot, and makes people feel less than. Oh, did you not understand what I said? Maybe people aren't understanding me very well. So
Mhm.
I think it's important that the community calls it out and corrects it, so it doesn't continue.
Okay, well, President Gulov or Dr. Rodriguez, anything else to add before I move on to our next question?
I'll touch on one piece that I had mentioned before is a fear of failing or wanting to do it on your own because we're afraid to. And when we're in larger groups, as a classified employee or a manager that's moving up through the ranks, let's not be afraid to ask a question if we don't know, because usually there's many other people in the room that don't know, and we can learn from that. And sometimes your question can also be, for me, early on when I was a classified employee, early on in management, sometimes I might throw a lot of comments in there. Sometimes I'd ask a really insightful question to get at things deeper that actually showed I do have knowledge and I want to learn more. So there's a variety of strategies you can use, but if you find yourself being afraid to making a mistake or not pulling someone else in because they might notice that, I think that's that sign for you to then start thinking about how can I overcome that.
Great. All right. Let me move on to the next question, which is awareness is the first thing, right? Being aware of this is what I'm experiencing. Now, once that you are aware of it, then going into what I'm going to do about it. So what are effective strategies and practices that anyone can make to change after recognizing they're experiencing and they're behaving or they're feeling as an imposter on the job?
Yeah, similar to how I talked about what are the symptoms, knowing what the symptoms are helps you kind of work on them, right? So if I end my statements with questions, I could practice not doing that. Or if I know that when I walk into a room, then I try to take up as little space as possible. Next time I can walk in and have my shoulders straightened out and kind of try to embrace the fact that I'm in this room. And then I really liked what Dr. Smith mentioned. I was owning your own voice. And especially with classified professionals, a lot of the times we're put in these rooms where we are the only classified professional voice. And then kind of like Dr. Rodriguez mentioned, you feel like you're the smallest person in the room because everyone outranks you. And it's hard to kind of be brave and say something when you think that something should be said. And the way that I compare this to is going to the doctor with your child or someone that you care for. And if you don't ask the questions of the doctor that you think should be asked, no one else will ask that. Right. And the same way, when we are classified professionals, we are in the room where maybe everyone outranks us, but that everyone doesn't necessarily have the experience of being classified professional and doesn't know what the struggles are. So if we don't bring up these issues, there's a chance that no one else will.
I agree. I think a lot of times when you walk into a room and if you don't have a certain degree behind you, I think you invalidate yourself and think I can't speak. I've had staff tell me, well, I don't have the PhD and the EDD, so I know I really shouldn't be saying, oh, yes, you should, because your opinions are important. And it doesn't matter what the letters are behind your name. You matter. Your experience matters. Your knowledge matters. And so it's just as important as anyone else. And you can contribute, and you are a major contributor, and you are important and valued. So reminding yourself that when you go into that room, it doesn't matter who has the PhD or the ED or the MA, that your opinion and your perceptions are very important. And you'd be surprised, because you can be the change that you want to see, and maybe somebody doesn't understand your perspective, particularly if you're frontline, if you're out there and you're seeing things from a different lens than others. Then let us know what the lens is. Show up, speak up, own your experience so we can learn too. And I think people will notice you.
And just to add to what my colleagues were saying, I have a story from earlier in my career when I was in a multi-college district, and I had to represent our department at a large district meeting. And I was terrified. I was terrified. I didn't know what to say if I disagreed with everyone. And we were looking at data, and I didn't know if a big number was good data, or if we wanted that number to be small. I just didn't know. Fortunately, I had a really wonderful department chair at that time, and I went to her and I asked for specific language. I said, Roberta, what do I say if I disagree? And she said, Virginia, you say this. I need to take this back to my department for further discussion. Or we're pleased with this number. And she sat with me for about, 45 minutes. I was so grateful for that mentoring, so that when I got to the meeting, and it turns out they wanted to do something in the district that was not going to work for our college, I was practically shaking because we were at this massive table. But I remembered what Roberta had told me, and I said that, and everybody went, oh, okay, that's fine. So I was fortunate in that I was able to seek out a mentor and ask for specific language. And for me, in that high stress situation, it helped me feel more confident that I was representing our college well. And then it was received. I had to wait for a moment where I was called on. So I didn't have the confidence to just jump in. And so I think that relates to with what our other panelists are saying here, and particularly what Dr. Smith was saying. But that was one strategy that helped me, was getting some preparation ahead of time and learning specific language that I could say. And then once I went through one meeting and then maybe a couple of more, I felt a little more confident. But it was scary the first time.
I'll just add one last piece. I agree with everything that's been said. And I think the key is, especially when we're a classified professional entering those groups, or that manager early on in your career, is making sure we're prepared. And that's what Virginia was just saying. And oftentimes we're in those committee meetings where someone will say something. It's like, well, that was in the handout that we just discussed 10 minutes ago. So I think doing that. And then following up on the other comment is, if you aren't ready to make a response, then go ahead and own that. Say that. I'm going to need some time to consider this. I don't think I can give you an answer right now, but I'm going to need some time for that. And just own that when you don't quite know it.
Great. Well, what I got out of that, what you said was that, okay, don't focus on what other people have, their degrees and whatever title that they have, but focus on what it is that you bring to the table and share that, and be bold and practice having that voice at the table. And also preparation, right? Do homework before, and that will really help strengthen your voice, and seek out help and practice. Thank you. I'm going to move to the next question. When we say these things, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, sure, it's so easy, but getting to yourself to start doing it is a different ways. To me, I think there is a distance, right? There is a way in which you work toward that. So it isn't something that you can be overnight. And I asked our participant to listen for these kind of actions that they could write down and say, I'm going to try that. I'm going to hold them to it. But if you can give suggestions, that would be very helpful in that regard. So my next question is, I'm going to focus and pose these questions to our presidents on the panel. How hard was it for you to break free? Now that you're president, are you free from the imposter syndrome? So how hard was it to break free from being an imposter in your career journey of moving up from one position to the other? And certainly you have had a number of positions going upwards. And I also want to give room to say that is it necessary to break free, and why or why not? I am curious about what you would say to that.
Well, I'll start on. And I feel, and I want to make sure I give credit to, it's similar like Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't think you're ever over it. It's understanding it and how do you continue to work on it. For me, I think it goes through cycles. As I take on new roles and responsibilities, or I step into new leadership roles representing larger groups, I think then it kind of rises up again until you get the confidence and sometimes the knowledge to go with it. For me, one of the things that I learned about when I think about myself as either the soloist or expert, that doesn't mean I am the expert. It's always meaning I strive to become more and more of an expert, is pleasing others. Was one of the symptoms. And for me, I think early on in my career, that helped me to find the yes, to find a way to get the yes for people, helping mediating things, helping to be the peacekeeper. But sometimes in our roles, we have to be the one to say, no, that can't happen. And once we realize we can't make everyone happy, then that's often what will happen. And I know at our college, there were times when my colleagues would call me out, saying, Vince, own it. You've got this. Don't be so shy. Don't be so afraid to speak up. And so for me, I'm always working on it. I think it helps to keep me humble. And so I don't want to completely lose that, but then be able to have that confidence to speak up and to represent the organization or my department or whatever entity I am at the time.
Now, Dr. Rodriguez, if you will allow me to push you a little bit further.
Yeah.
You said you help yourself to feel confident. What are some things that you did to help yourself feel more confident?
Well, let me tell you a story. And you were at the event. You came a little later. I was at one of our college events recently, and I'm not one that's shy for taking off my jacket, rolling up my sleeves, and getting involved just like another employee, because I started as a classified employee. But the employees stopped me and they said, Vince, we've got this. They were setting up tables and chairs. They said, we got this. Your job right now is to be ready for your speech. And we want to hear what you have to say. And they really gave me the confidence to say, Vince, you don't have to do this job because your job's over there and they want you to be prepared for your job. And that really made me feel good that they were giving me that comfort to say, don't worry, we've got this task for the setup. We got it. You don't have to show us that you're willing to do that. We already know that. And so part of it was the employees giving me the confidence to speak up. But there was one other thing that happened. George Floyd gave me a chance to speak for my voice, for my background, my family. That also gave me the resilience to say, your time is now to own your role and use your position you have for the greater good.
It's great. It's really finding that purpose, right? Finding the purpose to give you the courage and the confidence that there is a reason why I need to speak and I can speak and contribute. I love that. Thanks. Okay. I'm looking for the President Gula.
Because just to add to what my colleague was saying, I think sometimes when you're a classified professional and you move into a management role, it's difficult at first to be comfortable with directing the work of others. And as Dr. Rodriguez was saying, to also have the confidence to own the authority of that next position that you're in. So even now, like you, Vince, I forget, and I still think I'm a tutor and I'm clearing plates and I'm putting up stuff with sticky notes and same at my college. They're like, no, Virginia, you can stand down. We've got this. You've got your job. But I think a lot about when I was first directing the work in my area, working with an administrative assistant, I knew the things that I had experienced that I had liked from the managers I had worked with as a classified professional, and I knew the things that hadn't really resonated so well with me. So I was mindful of that. But that is a big imposter syndrome moment when you say, okay, we're going to take on this project and we're going to go this way and everyone's trusting you. The thing that helped me work through that was knowing that I had done many of the jobs that I was asking people to do. So I knew what it entailed. And sometimes that's difficult when you move forward in your career, to know that you're asking someone to do something that might take them a week when you thought it would take 5 hours or 2 days, or you're asking them to do something that you might think is going to take a long time and it's really a 30-minute task. So just having had those experiences as a classified professional helped me understand what I was asking my team to accomplish. And so that was a way that I could draw on that past experience and work through feeling like, well, maybe I really shouldn't be a manager. No, it's okay. You know what your team needs to do, and you know what it takes to do that, so you can move them forward.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to circle back to Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, you touched on this about intersectionality, the unique intersectionality of people of color. And then for you as a woman of color, you experienced a different intersectionality with the imposter syndrome. So can you tell us about your own experience and what you have observed from other men and women of color, and how you or they have, gone about breaking from this, being plagued with the imposter syndrome? I know some people that it's just become frozen, right? That's where they stayed and they don't break out of it. So I would like to hear a little bit about your thoughts about how they could prevent themselves from feeling confident or competent to advance their own career.
I think, our workplace and cultural communities are beginning to change. And we have seen it over the years. Our communities are different. For example, in the LA Community College District, we have our equity social justice framework. And for us, that's our pillar. I mean, all the work that we do, I'm looking at it through the framework, through that lens, how we're doing this work, and how are we informing our communities based on this work. So I think being more intentional with who we are and what we do, creating guidelines that are able to provide systemic change in institutions, such as the one that our chancellor is doing, has really helped a lot. And it also helps because the communities have begun to change some. Some of the antiquated ideals of what professionalism is seen to be and what it's not really has changed and impacted a lot of our Black, Indigenous people of color as it relates to imposter syndrome. I think the inequitable policing of appearances, the perception of what's professional and what's not professional, for example, as it relates to our hair. We're really blessed that I'm also vice president of the LA County Commission for Women, appointed by Supervisor Holly Mitchell. And Holly Mitchell authored the Crown Act. And the Crown Act impacted our communities quite a bit, because the Crown Act allowed us to be in our space and be our authentic self. Whereas prior to that, we had to be something that may not have really been ourselves when we went home. So we had to be one way at home and one way at work. For example, the Crown Act allowed us to be able to wear our hair naturally, curly, locks, twists, or braids. And prior to that, and we may not have been able to do that at work before. Prior to that, it was seen as unprofessional, acting out on the job. And so we might wear braids at home, but when we got to work, we had to change our hair up. Cultural clothing is different. I mean, we were, told we had to wear a suit all the time, or, wear a dress, and we couldn't dress in our cultural form to reflect our cultural communities. We were told it was inappropriate. And so, which created a lot of environmental inequities that fed into the imposter syndrome, because my culture may wear hair differently or dress differently, and you're perceiving me as not fitting in when you're making me think something's wrong with me when there's nothing wrong with me. So I think a lot of things are shifting and changing and allowing us to really reflect more of who we are based on the intersectionality of ourselves. But as a Black woman, I find that we undergo a lot more scrutiny than other cultures because, you know, if we're responding to a racist microaggression, people are looking at how we respond to the situation, and they will, how can I say that? They will reprimand you or discipline you based on your response more than they will based upon the person who actually committed the microaggression against you. So think about that. People are more concerned about how we respond to the microaggression versus how the person who committed the microaggression against us. And that has a lot to do with culture and perception. I'll give you an example of something that was interesting to me when I was a dean. At a community college, there was a white man that really was angry about a situation that had occurred and demanded to see the dean. And they said, the dean is over there. That's the dean. No, that's not the dean. You're giving me someone else. I want the dean. They said, that is the dean. No, you're trying to pass this along. I want to see the dean. So he was so upset because he looked at me and I did not look the way he expected me to look as a dean. And so when they finally convinced him to come to see the dean and speak to the dean, he even told me, he says, you're the dean? He says, you're not the dean. You're not tall. You're not large, white, bald. This is what the dean is supposed to look like. How did you get to be the dean? And so, you know, that put me in a situation where, you know, I felt like I had to explain to him who I am, my education, my credentials. And so, I mean, once again, how you present yourself and respond to that will really, it's different. That's why I say for people of color, our responses and how we perceive the imposter syndrome may be more racialized or different than others. And so I think the educational institutions, they have a duty to hold people accountable for perpetuating systemic racism and sexism as it drives imposter syndrome. And there's some things that we have to do to ensure that our communities are served, remove the myths and stereotypes that some of our communities have upon us, and also to make sure that our staff and our faculty are protected within those communities. And so I just believe that, I've always been told as a woman of color, you have to, as I mentioned earlier, you're expected to do double the work of education to secure your job, have more education, have more experience, and make sure you're qualified when you apply for a position. But that's because we are told that we have to be qualified 100% or don't apply. Whereas our countergender, a male can apply for a position and maybe meet only 60% of what the application says, yet they still may get a chance to sit at the table and be interviewed versus from a different perspective, you may not. So I just feel like it's just really important that the institution owns the experience and the institution creates an opportunity like we have with our equity social justice framework to ensure that there's some checks and balances to support, create a safety net, and protect our communities.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I'm going to move to Olga. As a classified professional leader on your campus as well as statewide, I wonder if you could just provide a couple of examples of what you observed from those who have made very successful pathways to counter and manage their own imposter syndrome and to succeed.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I've been thinking about it for a while since you gave us the questions and thinking about some of the successful leaders that I know and kind of where they started, how they got there. And in my time as the Classified Senate President at ARC and then statewide as an area representative, looking at the people who maybe made the biggest strides was seeing that they started participating in something other than just their job, which our jobs are not just our jobs, right? At the same time, a lot of the times we have to kind of involve ourselves more on campus, more with other people in order for others to see it. And then when we start involving ourselves, the biggest piece in going to all of these different meetings when we might be the smallest person in the room is doing our homework. As if there's anything that we can do better is we can prepare, right? So we can read all of the documents beforehand, think about the questions, think about the concerns, and then always stay informed. And this might sound like I'm trying to promote the chancellor's office, but they have those webinars about the legislative updates and things like that. So looking at those things so that you are in the know about what is happening. And then communicating our truth respectfully. That is also kind of a big piece of the ones that I have seen succeed. When they are in these meetings and they are communicating and owning their voice, they are doing so respectfully. They're doing so with building up the community, talking about their fellow classified professionals. And then as much as it sometimes hurts to say, sometimes we have to work extra hard not to burn any bridges, especially for those of us who go through that path of trying to move up in our careers. A lot of the times we get hurt along the way, right? And it takes us a while to kind of get up and keep walking. And at the same time, not burning bridges, it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, unless it's a bridge that is worth burning when something happens that doesn't align with our personal values, right? So not burning bridges when people hurt us it's real and unfortunate. At the same time, we do need to know when is that time when, okay, so now something happened and it is completely against my values, and I would be willing to say I'm not going to get the next promotion because ABC. One of the things that I was advised in thinking about my career trajectory was somebody told me when I was in my classified role that if I ever want to move up, I need to stop spending so much time with students. And that was a value I just wasn't willing to compromise on. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to be in this role for the rest of my life, that's okay, because that will be true to my values because we are there for the students. So I'll just end with that.
I don't know who gave you that advice that you need to spend less time with students. That is from a whole different school of thought that I just don't prescribe to that. I hate to say it. I thought that you actually gave quite a few advice. I was going to ask you if you have any, specific advice that you want to offer to your fellow professionals, but you gave quite a few right there in that response. Do you have anything else to add?
I have one more thing to add is finding a good mentor. And a mentor is not just someone who's above us in a position, it's also a mentor who will advocate for us when we are not in the room. So a mentor is someone who really believes in us, believes in our skill set, believes that we do deserve to be where we want to be. And then just as a final thought is wherever we are in our career trajectory, whether we are a classified professional looking to move up, not looking to move up, wherever we are, just committing to being the best where we are today. And that will help us kind of think about, am I an imposter? And if I'm truly, to me, my best self where I am, then I will not be an imposter.
That's great advice. Just concentrating on being the best, so that becomes your badge of honor, right? And also instill more confidence. I like that. Thank you, Olga. Dr. Smith, you actually have touched on quite a bit of this that I was going to ask you about. And I think what you said earlier, it's just so poignant that yes, it's not always about what it is you are going to do, but institutions need to take responsibilities at times. So if you have anything else to add, my question to you would be about focusing on institutional practice because of your role at the district office. I'm sure you've given lots of advice at the institutional level. How can organizational practices and leadership initiatives in a workplace culture contributing to creating that environment that foster self-acceptance instead of imposter syndrome and openness to authenticity, as you talked about it earlier, using the hair example, and also to build that immunity to imposter syndrome? Anything you want to comment on that or add just a little bit?
Okay, briefly, I'll just say that we must just continue to require diversity, equity, inclusion in the workforce space. A lot of times for women of color, we endure scrutiny of spaces that were not created for us. And so we are being the change agents in these spaces. And so I always tell communities that I'm speaking to, be the change you want to see. So we must change the culture of the spaces, because no, they weren't necessarily created for us. And so you have the right and experience to change the space you want. And so I'll say, throughout my career, as I started as a program coordinator at a community college and worked my way to vice president and now senior advisor to the chancellor, I became the change I wanted to see. What I didn't like, I changed it. And you have the power to do that. It doesn't matter classification or rank. It matters what your thoughts are and what your beliefs are and what you believe you want to do and can do. You can do it. And so I think for us, we have to, as a system, create an environment, an educational institution that holds ourselves accountable for the environmental inequities that are perpetuating the systemic racism and sexism that drives imposter syndrome. So our communities don't have these feelings of imposter syndrome or racialized imposter syndrome. And I think in our district, as I mentioned earlier, our equity social justice framework is a great example of how we're doing that and creating systems and changing behaviors that can change the perception of imposter syndrome. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And I'm going to turn to my two presidents here on the panel again to finish off our panel today. Is that, can you just give, because I've asked them to take notes, and I'm going to challenge our participants on action. So what specific approaches, or in particular concrete actions, would you prescribe to our participants today in dealing with imposter syndrome, aiming at empowering them to take on greater responsibility in advancing their own skills? Who is going first? Virginia, you want to go
Is that
first?
me? Is that me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Vince. I was waiting for you. You know, there's we were talking earlier before this began, and we were talking, I was saying that, and looking through this, I realized that oftentimes I was super generous with time with students and very forgiving for them, but really hard on myself. And that I wanted to think of now the California Community College as my teacher. I've learned so much about myself and about, and as Dr. Smith was just talking about, the opportunities now we have for DEIA squared, and to really, in our positions, weave that into the fabric of our colleges. So I want to kind of go back a little bit and say, I wish that I had taken more opportunity, even though I was successful and have been successful in my career, to really engage in professional development, to not put that off, to really engage in learning, to find the resources on the internet. I didn't know what FTES meant in 1986 when I was 23, but now I could Google that. And then to also think of our experiences, as you were talking, Dr. Smith, I was thinking of a time that I evaluated my male athletic director. And at the end of the class, so I'd been sitting there taking notes. And at the end of the class, one of the students said, well, your secretary has taken notes for this class. And my AD said, no, that's my dean. But if we unpack that, like the work, my mother was a secretary. I worked as a secretary. That's very difficult work. And so it was such a mix of emotions to unpack that as related to imposter syndrome and gender. So I just would encourage self-reflection. And one concrete thing that I did is every year, it sounds really corny, I wrote a letter to myself and I opened it the next year. And so I wrote things like, this is what I accomplished. In my 1 year, I wrote about that experience and said I didn't know how to process that, because I was proud of being a secretary, but I was also proud of being a dean at that moment. So like keeping track for yourself and writing to yourself about your accomplishments, I think is very important. And sometimes It's really hard, but you have to dig deep and be your person for yourself that says, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. And I know we talk a lot about positive affirmations now in social media, but like, I can do it. I can do it is really important. So pardon me if I got a little off topic there. I got
No,
kind of
that's all
excited about
right.
what Dr. Smith was saying.
I already
I
like
wanted to
that
share
action.
that.
I don't write annual letters to myself, so I'm going to remember that one. It's something I could do too. Dr. Rodriguez, maybe a
Oh.
final minute of one action or two.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. For our classified professionals, one of the things that I did early on was I went to my supervisors. I went to my dean, I went to my president, of which is in this room here, and said, I'm looking for some other opportunities, some growth. And they helped lead me along the way. That was a huge success for me. And then secondly, I was looking at the different times I interviewed for positions, and my average is 10 years of waiting to interview for that next position. Don't wait for that. I think you're going to hear over and over again, 3 to 5 years is you learn that position, ready for the next challenge. So don't think you're not ready for it, especially those of us of color. We think we have to wait. And I know it's already been said. So I'm to our other managers. I would say, let's not be the one to restate what was already said by our doctors and our colleagues that have already had some great things. Let's let their own voice speak for itself. And again, I would urge our people, go to the supervisor, don't wait too long. And if you have imposter syndrome, that probably means you're prepared. You just don't have the confidence, and go search that out.
That's great. And I remember you really did that action. Come and ask, hey, what opportunities are there for me to grow into? So thank you. My goodness, I'm looking at the time. We are at the final minute. So I just ask all the participants to help me thank the wonderful panel again. I sure hope you have taken something in, and also write down you have one action to start. So thank you again. And evaluation survey link is here in the chat. Please, please, please take just a couple of minutes to fill that out. And we welcome you to join us again in May 17, for the next webinar on how to unleash, tap into your leadership potential. That is also another must not miss webinar. We hope that you will join us again, and I'm going to try to end on time today. Thank you again.